Hi, this is video 3, the final video covering the MGT 600 topic 7 lecture on managing change. Obviously, if you haven't watched video 1 and 2 first, then please watch those before this video, because this will only make sense really in the context of the last two videos that we've just covered. Excuse me. Okay, so now moving forward. Changing things, new products and technologies. Cooperation. First of all, internal coordination. So failed innovation is often the result of failed cooperation. Overcoming resistance to change. So this is the primary challenge that we face as an organization. If we could just design change, apply it, the organization would change, like changing a product, then it would be very easy, obviously, to continuously adapt as a company. But we're dealing with human beings. And when we're dealing with human beings, then the psychology of accepting change comes into play. I would argue even the evolutionary psychology that goes back to our existence on the savannas of Africa, where we didn't like new things. To survive as human beings, we wanted things to be nice and stable. A stable environment meant lower risk, meant survival. So really hardwired into us as human beings is this desire not to change. And I'm certainly not the first academic who said something along those sort of lines. People who have studied this area have said this as well. So companies that successfully innovate have people in marketing that have a good understanding of customer needs. So this is why marketing is really integrated into everything the company does, because marketing's job, the job of the marketing department, is not simply to take the product and then to convince customers to try that product. Marketing's job is to actually identify what are the best markets to sell to, exactly what those markets want. And sometimes that involves actually not asking them, because the markets might not know what they currently want. As Steve Jobs famously said, I don't ask my customers what they want, because by the time I've made it, they want something else. So sometimes that is actually a case of even going ahead, trying to figure out what they might want in the future. Looking at their needs, wants, and demands. Once those have been identified, then trying to produce a marketing mix. So, 4 Ps or extended 7 or 8 Ps of the service marketing mix, to create a marketing mix for each of the segments that exactly matches their needs, wants, and demands, with features and benefits that we offer on our product, the right price, selling in the right location, to the right places, and using the right promotions. So the right combination of attractions to get the customers to be excited by our product, having the right people, physical evidence, packaging, partnerships, etc. So that's marketing's role, to then take that knowledge and to integrate it into everything else that the company does, so that the company can be dynamic in really producing something that, when the customers interact with it, it will exceed their expectations. It won't meet them, it will actually exceed them. And that's a hard thing to do, but if you exceed expectations, you get loyal customers, those customers return. If you meet expectation, then you get satisfied customers who might come back, but they might go try your competition just to see if they're better. Technical specialists that are aware of recent developments. So you have to know yourself, as Sun Tzu said, but you've also got to know your enemies. So you've got to know your competitors. Not just your competitors, you've also got to know other industries as well. They know what's happening in other industries. Know if there are new products, new tools coming out on the market that could help your industry, especially if you are an early adopter of this technology. Members from key departments cooperating in the development of new products. So again, producing that cooperation. Not a them and us mentality within the company, but one synergistic whole where the company works together for the betterment of the whole company. All right, so this is Kurt Lewin's force field theory. As I mentioned before, this is one of the first major theories created to help with the process of organizational development and change management, to reduce that resistance, to reduce things sliding back to the way they were after the change has been applied. So the concept here is that there is a state in which the company is functioning. When you are applying a change initiatives, you want to take the company from the way that it's currently working to a new place of functioning. So therefore, you have to unfreeze the current behavior. That means people are doing things, they're stuck in their way, they're doing things a certain way. So you need to make them pliable, accepting of the fact that they cannot just continue to do what they were previously doing. They've got to shift their behavior to a new place where they are doing things a different way, the new way that we want them to be doing them. So we unfreeze their behavior. Participants become aware of problems and become willing to change. We use change agents and change experts here to help do this, to help convince our changees that the change is required, that it is real, that it is organization-wide deep change. Then we have the changing. This is the actual moving of our position of functioning from where we currently are to where we want to be. So individual experiments with new behaviors and skills. Again, this might not be linear exactly. There might be some element of equifinality to this where we can, something doesn't work, we can try different things. As I mentioned before, it's usually departmental. So we'll go one department to another, not do them all at the same time. We'll learn lessons, we'll improve as we go through that process to try and increase the adoption of the change. We keep strong pressure on all the way throughout the organization, but especially from the top, the requirement to adapt and change at this point in time. Then there is the refreezing. This is where we get people to operate in the new way that we want them to operate. And the important thing here is we support this to the extent where we don't allow people to just slide back to the way that they used to function. And this is the biggest risk. If we apply the change, if we do everything that we have mentioned up to this point, but then we take our foot off the gas pedal, so to speak, then things slide back. According to the Bain & Co research I mentioned in the last video, things slide back to about 20% of the extent that we would like them to change. So 80% slide back, which obviously then is a very poor return on investment for any change initiative. So what we need now is to refreeze this into place. Now this, as I mentioned, is one of the first major models. There are subsequent models to this, extensions on this model that increase the stages, the steps involved in the change process. And a lot of them will build in a continuous improvement loop at the end. So we get to the new place and then we have a system for identifying incremental ways in which change can then continuously be applied. That creates that more fertile environment, that acceptance of change, the organizational learning culture. Okay. So implementing change. Resistance to change, we've mentioned. Force field analysis, we've just touched on, and implementation tactics we shall talk about. So resistance to change, this can be due to self-interest. So I know how to do this, this is easy, I have my power here, you're threatening my power, therefore I don't want to change. And again, it's not to say these are poor employees for having that perspective. This is a very natural thing for human beings to feel when faced with change. There's a lack of understanding and trust. So is this just surface level and fake change? Okay, the great video clip here by Jason Clark, one of Australia's experts on change, below, which I will be asking you guys to watch and to think about a couple of questions relating to as a part of the tutorial activity for this week, for the topic 7 week. He discusses this, that people are okay with change if they think it's going to be deep, it's going to be real change, it's going to be supported, and it's going to really bring about positive value to the organization. But most people who have worked in industry for a while have experienced surface level change that's just stirring the pot. It's people trying to create some sort of importance around the role that they do, maybe for personal gain, where they just do new things for the sake of doing them, not because they're necessarily needed. And that produces a lack of trust in the employees that they're going to be asked to do a lot to achieve nothing. So if employees have the sense that that might be the case, they're going to be very resistant to the change. So a part of what we're trying to do here is to convince them that it is real change, it's deep change. There's uncertainty. So what is there going to be in the future? Again, Jason Clark in this video deals with this question really well. Okay, really clarifying what people need to know and letting them know what they need to know. Different assessments and goals. Okay, so where were you before? What were you achieving before? Where will you be in the future? How will you be assessed? And what goals will you be achieving? You know, if you think you've been in a company, the benefit of being there for some time, knowing what you do, what you have to do on a day-to-day basis, what you're trying to achieve, there's clarity in that. If you take that away, if you ask people to do something completely different, that lack of clarity can produce the nervousness that produces resistance to change. So Lewin, we just talked about, this is the force field theory, force field analysis, the process of determining which forces drive and which resist a proposed change. So the way to think about this, if we're in our current position before the change, there is a force to improve from the company and a force to remain the same as things are, to maintain the status quo in opposition to the force from the company from the employees. That's the resistance to change. If we are to unfreeze and move, then we need to increase the pressure, the force to change, and reduce the resistance to maintain the status quo. If we can do this successfully, then we can apply the change. So then we have the unfreezing, we have the moving, and then to refreeze in place, remember that force to resist change, to go back to the status quo, is still there. If anything, because of the disruption, it has increased. So because it's increased, if we then reduce our force to change, then things will push back to the way they were. So what we need to do now is maintain, if anything, increase that force to change, as long as it is needed for that resistance to die down, and then we can refreeze the way that the company functions in the new place. So that's what Kurt Lewin's force field theory identified. So the example given here, moving from a traditional inventory system to a just-in-time system, JIT, something very common within manufacturing organizations. So you've got driving forces for change, inventory costs, fewer workers, more competitive market responses. You've got restraining forces, so barriers to change. You've got freight systems, facility layout, worker skills, and maybe union resistance to job loss. The shift to the new place, where you've got inventory cost savings, fewer workers, and more competitive market responses. So that force is still there. The reduced restraining forces, though, you've got use of trucks, addition of docks, training programs, and reassignments, which are all things that are much easier to manage than those forces that were barriers to change in the traditional inventory system. So implementing change, implementation tactics here, communication and education. Change is technical very often, so it's helping the employees to understand what will be required of them. People fear what they don't know, so when they start to understand what's required of them, then they will be less likely to be resistant to the change. Participation, so users need to feel involved. Users have power to resist, so design requires information. So this is where we start to say, well, you can be involved. This is not set in stone. We want your feedback, we want your input. You can certainly help us in identifying what is the best way to apply this change, and therefore take ownership, stamp your mark on this process, and that is a good thing to get people involved. So when we say information tactics here, so starting with the easiest, communication and education is the easiest, and then coercion is the hardest. Okay, so now we start to get to negotiation. This is where there's more of an immediate requirement to change. So look, we have to change now. If you are not accepting of this change, then things will go horribly wrong. So we need you to be accepting. How can we get you to a place where you're accepting? This is more important. Coercion, this is where it is essential that we change now. Survival of the organization is based on us changing now, and there is no option. So therefore it's saying to staff members, you either agree to change or we're going to have to part company. And that's coercion. It's forcing people into change. Sometimes not ideal, but certainly necessary in some circumstances. Top management support, as we've mentioned before, if you don't have that top management support, then that derails change before it's even started. If there is conflict within the top management, then the idea that the change is real and deep is immediately negated, which stops buy-in by most people within the organization. So implementing sustainable development in the organization, there will be resistance to change. Training and workshops may assist in helping to reduce this resistance. Use evolutionary approaches rather than revolutionary approaches for a higher likelihood of success. So pilot projects, incremental building of culture, implementation of new measures and goals at all levels of the organization. If you have the luxury of time to be able to do this, then obviously small change is going to be easier to accept than dramatic change. Again, and if you can create an environment that accepts continuous improvement as a way of how they function, they're going to be much more receptive to the revolutionary change if you do need to apply it or when you do need to apply it. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the 3 videos. As I mentioned, I will be posting a tutorial for you guys to watch a video, the Jason Clark video above, and to answer a couple or think about a couple of questions, and then we'll talk this through as a chat probably in about a week and a half. So that would be the 22nd, 29th, I think, approximately. But I will put a publication up on Monday to say exactly when this will be.